story opened on a bustling city at night, where the protagonist was making his way home after a long day. He rode his bike casually, relaxed and unaware of the danger ahead. As he approached an intersection, the light turned green in his favor, and everything appeared routine, until a speeding truck ignored its red light and hurtled straight toward him. In that split second, he froze, unable to react. The impact was inevitable. The truck struck him, sending him crashing through the air before he slammed onto the pavement. Moments later, he lay sprawled on the ground while voices around him shouted for someone to call an ambulance. Pain surged through every part of his body, and as consciousness slipped away, his final regret was that he would never finish building the model kids he loved. Then suddenly, the scene shifted. In a vast desert, a lone bird soared high above an expansive caravan making its way across the sand dunes. The caravan was composed of several men on horseback, led by an older man who issued sharp commands. He pointed toward the sky, instructing one of his archers to take down the bird. The archer obeyed instantly. With a smooth, practiced motion, he drew his bow, released the arrow, and struck the bird with perfect precision. It fell lifelessly from the sky and landed atop one of the caravan's wooden carts. Carts that were, in fact, cages. As a man reached up to retrieve the bird's body, blood from the creature seeped through the wooden slats. A single drop slipped inside the cage and landed on the forehead of the young man trapped within. That young man, now the new protagonist, awoke with a start. His head throbbed as he realized he was confined inside a small, cramped wooden cage. A little girl beside him remarked that he had finally woken up. He stared at her in confusion, unable to understand who she was or where he had ended up. When he touched his head, a rush of unfamiliar memories flooded into his mind. Memories belonging to the body's original owner, a noble who had fled from an arranged marriage. As the pieces fell into place, he was overwhelmed by the chaotic situation he now found himself in. The little girl, noticing his expression, asked nervously whether he was all right. He assured her that he was fine, and gently requested that she stop calling him her benefactor, insisting that he had done nothing to save her. The young man introduced himself as Kun Li, and gently asked the little girl for her name. She told him that her grandfather used to call her Little Grass. When Kun Li asked whether her grandfather was also trapped in the cart with them, her expression darkened. She explained quietly that he had sacrificed himself so she could escape. As Kun Li looked around, he noticed that the prisoners inside the cage were mostly women and children. He studied the guards outside and quickly realized they were trained soldiers, far too strong for him to challenge in his current state. Suddenly, a little boy nearby burst into tears. He shook his sister desperately, trying to wake her, but the girl lay motionless on the floor. When he finally understood she was gone, grief twisted into fury. He grabbed the bars of the cage and screamed at the soldiers, vowing he would kill them all someday. One of the soldiers responded with a cruel smile. Without hesitation, he raised his whip and struck the boy with a vicious snap. The child collapsed, trembling, as the soldier warned him that speaking again would earn him something far worse. Even curled on the ground, the boy clenched his fists, shaking with pure, uncontrollable rage. Kun Li and the other captives could do nothing but watch. The scene made Kun Li acutely aware of the brutal world he had been reborn into, a world ravaged by war and cruelty. He thought grimly that being reborn was the good news, but landing in a place like this was definitely the bad news.
Then, without warning, a strange sound echoed in the back of his mind. Curious and confused, he closed his eyes to investigate the source. His consciousness slipped inward, and he found himself standing within a mental space he had never seen before, a gacha system interface offering 10 free spins a day. Kun Li wondered if this unusual luck-based system was his new special ability. A glowing prompt appeared asking whether he wished to use his 10 daily spins. He agreed instantly. 10 cards whirled around him in a spiral of brilliant light before revealing themselves. His excitement quickly faded. The cards contained nothing but worthless items, burnt rice, murky water, and other scraps. Frustrated, he sighed as the system announced that the items had been added to his inventory. It also notified him that he had received a beginner's bonus. That part sparked his enthusiasm again. He activated the bonus, granting him 20 additional spins. Energy flared around him as 20 cards rotated rapidly. But once more, disappointment struck. Most of the items were low-quality food and water. Kun-li stood speechless, stunned by how terrible his luck seemed to be. Yet 2 cards caught his attention: a peculiar pill and a berserk potion. Seeing these, he realized the system could pull items from entirely different worlds. The discovery sent a thrill through him. Encouraged, he prepared to use his final 10 spins, hoping desperately for something valuable at last. He clasped his hands together and prayed with all his might for a 5-star item. When the cards appeared before him, one of them pulsed with a radiant golden glow. Although most of the new items were junk, one card stood out, the golden one. Kun-li examined it and discovered that it contained the Trial of General Liu, a temporary power he could use for 3 minutes. Even if the duration was short, he believed it would be enough to escape his current predicament. The system then informed him that his spins were complete and that he would return to the real world in 3 seconds. When Kun-li opened his eyes, he was back in the wooden cage exactly as before. No time had passed at all. From this he concluded that entering the gotcha space froze time in the outside world. Focusing his thoughts, he opened his inventory to review everything he had obtained. He learned that he only needed to think of an item for it to appear in his hand. To test the system, he summoned the water bottle card. With a simple mental command, the bottle materialized in his palm. Kun-li smiled, pleased that he now understood how the system worked. He opened the bottle and drank deeply, satisfying his thirst. Little Grass watched in amazement and asked where he had gotten the water from. Kun-li handed it to her, telling her she must be thirsty too. She held it as if it were some royal treasure. After taking a sip, her eyes widened. The water was sweet and refreshing, unlike anything she had ever tasted. She thanked him repeatedly and tried to give the bottle back, but Kun-li insisted she drink more, explaining that the guards never gave them enough water. The girl protested that such precious water should not be wasted on her, but Kun-li simply smiled and summoned a packet of food to show her he had plenty. Satisfied, he told her to bring over the boy who had been whipped earlier. The caravan continued its slow march across the desert, the prisoners swaying silently in their cages. A short while later, Little Grass returned with the boy. The child immediately recognized Kun-li, asking if he was the scholar who had tried to protect them earlier. Kun-li ignored the question. With a serious expression, he told the boy he would only ask once: did he want revenge? The boy froze, shocked by the unexpected question. But a moment later, the anger inside him resurfaced, and he shouted that he wanted revenge, that he wished every one of those soldiers would fall. Kun-li smiled, satisfied by the determination in the boy's voice. He told him to do exactly as instructed. Before explaining further, Kun-li summoned another packet of food and a bottle of water, causing the boy to gape in disbelief. He asked Kun-li how he had produced such things in a place like this. Kun-li urged both children to eat quickly, then asked whether they knew anyone in the other carts. The boy nodded and said that his friend Shan, someone from the same village, was imprisoned in the cart ahead of theirs.
Little Grass added that several young women from a neighboring village and someone they all knew were imprisoned in the cart behind them. Hearing this, Kun-li smirked and said he already had a plan to get everyone out. Moments later, one of the patrolling guards heard a desperate cry for help coming from their cart. The voice belonged to Little Grass, who shouted that a crazy person was attacking them inside. Right on cue, the boy began acting out a violent struggle, pretending to assault Kun-li, who lay motionless on the floor. The commotion drew the guard's attention. He lashed the boy with his whip, pulling him off Kun-li. The boy fell with a thud, and both he and Kun-li remained on the ground, feigning severe injury to maintain the act. Kun-li slowly got up and thanked the guard, claiming the boy had completely lost his mind. Curious, the soldier approached the cage and demanded to know what had happened. Kun-li pointed toward the lifeless body of the boy's sister, saying her corpse was beginning to smell and would spread disease if left inside. The boy, continuing the act flawlessly, screamed that nobody was allowed to touch his sister. His outburst made the guard hesitate. He appeared to consider the idea of removing the body. After a moment, he stepped back and went to discuss the matter with the other soldiers. Soon after, an older guard arrived and barked an order at Kun-Li. He was to remove the girl's corpse from the cage immediately. Kun-Li pretended to panic, insisting he could not because the boy had gone insane. But the guard grew impatient, raising his voice and demanding whether he had failed to understand the order. The boy rushed forward protectively, placing himself between the guards and his sister's body, shouting for them to stay away. Kun-Li discreetly signaled him to hold back and not act too soon. The boy caught the signal and, instead of resisting, broke down into sobs of frustration. Moving on to the next stage of the plan, Kun-Li and another prisoner carefully lifted the girl's body. Together they carried her toward the front of the cage, preparing to hand her over. Outside, archers raised their bows, ready to shoot at the slightest suspicious movement. Kun-Li's expression hardened. He knew the next moment was critical. Without drawing attention, he activated a strengthening card from his gacha inventory. The card materialized into a small glowing pill in his palm. He wasted no time and swallowed it. The older guard saw the motion and shouted in alarm, demanding to know what he had taken. In an instant, golden energy surged around Kun-Li's body, illuminating the cramped cage. He felt his strength skyrocket, his muscles tightening as power coursed through him. Enraged by this blatant defiance, the guard yanked his bowstring back and took aim, determined to end Kun-Li's life. With a furious cry, he released the arrow, sending it slicing toward the cage with lethal precision. Kun-Li's eyes burned with fierce, unnatural light. He was more than ready for combat. As the guards released another round of arrows, he struck just once, and the force of his blow shattered every arrow mid-air. Splinters scattered harmlessly to the ground. Before the soldiers could react, Kun-Li launched himself from the cart. He landed behind them in a single powerful leap. The guards stared in disbelief, whispering amongst themselves, wondering if he was some legendary martial grandmaster. Their captain quickly snapped out of his shock and bellowed an order for all units to attack. Soldiers surged forward as Kun-Li felt the temporary strength from the pill beginning to fade. He knew he was running out of time, but he showed no fear. Instead, he reached for his real trump card, the trial of General Lu Bu, a power he could use for 3 minutes. As the soldiers drew back their bows and fired a rain of flaming arrows at him, Kun-Li's pulse quickened with excitement. At last he would see what this card could truly do. Holding it tightly, he shouted the name of the skill with all his strength. A deafening burst of blue energy exploded upward from the earth, knocking every soldier off their feet. The shock wave echoed across the desert. Within seconds, the swirling energy condensed, forming a massive armored figure, a towering war machine, the manifested avatar of the mighty General Lu Bu. Inside the colossal mech, Kun-Li's voice boomed as he declared he would send every last barbarian to the next world. The giant robot turned toward the scattering soldiers. Panic rippled through their ranks as they desperately attempted to flee. The mech wasted no time. It reached for its oversized halberd and lifted it with ease. With a single sweeping strike, the halberd cut across the battlefield, taking down multiple soldiers in one devastating blow. Yet Kun-Li quickly realized the flaw. The enemies were tiny in comparison, making precise hits annoyingly difficult. One remaining guard managed to break free of the chaos and sprinted toward the dunes. But the mech was far faster. It thundered across the sand, closing the distance in seconds. Then, with an earth-shaking stomp, it crushed the fleeing soldier under its massive foot. Back in the cage, the boy and Little Grass watched with wide, disbelieving eyes. The boy pointed in shock and asked whether the scholar was actually an immortal. Little Grass's eyes sparkled with awe. She whispered, "He must be a soldier from the heavens, sent down to save us all."
Dust filled the air as the giant robot turned its gaze toward the remaining soldiers. Their horses panicked immediately, bolting and leaving their riders scrambling for their lives. Those who remained shouted in a strange dialect, terrified by the sight before them. Some cried that this was too horrifying to witness, while another screamed that a god of the eternal heavens had descended. Yet others insisted it was a demon. questioning why such a monstrous being would protect two-legged sheep, their term for ordinary people. The enormous mechanized warrior tightened its grip around a halberd and in a booming metallic voice told the bandits to taste its blade. With one powerful throw, the halberd soared across the battlefield and struck the ground with such force that it triggered a massive explosion, scattering sand and bodies alike. One of the bandit captains shouted to his men that this was no heavenly deity at all, but a trick of the Central Plains. Raising his bow, he prepared to fire. The giant robot instantly noticed him. The bandit's horse sensed death itself approaching and reared wildly, throwing its rider into panic. As he tried desperately to regain control, the robot extended its enormous palm. The bandits cried out in terror, believing it to be a legendary Buddha palm technique. A second later, the robot slammed its hand down. Both the man and his horse were crushed like insects beneath its weight. The other soldiers panicked. One screamed for the rest to run. Inside the cockpit, Kun Li heard them and asked coldly whether they truly thought they could escape. Then he turned the mech around and activated one of its signature moves. Mount Tai crushes the heavens. The robot fell backward with deliberate force, smashing the fleeing bandits beneath its titanic body. As Kun Li pushed himself upright, he realized that the 3-minute duration of the Lu Bu trial was nearly over. Using the last moments of borrowed power, he stretched out the mech's giant hand toward the prisoner carts. With effortless strength, he shattered the wooden cages one by one, freeing the captives trapped inside. At the final cart, he tore it open completely, allowing the prisoners to crawl out into the open air. The rescued people immediately collapsed to their knees in awe. One shouted that a god had descended to the mortal realm. Another cried that the deity was displaying his divine power. Several bowed repeatedly, thanking the immortal who had saved their lives. Among them, a trembling man pointed toward the horizon. In a fearful whisper, he reported that a few barbarian riders had escaped. If they were allowed to return to their tribe, he warned, they would bring back reinforcements, and far worse would come. The MC remained standing calmly, assuring everyone that everything was fine. As he gathered his thoughts, he remembered that Lu Bu once wielded a bow. In that instant, his cyborg arm began to shift, dissolving and reforming. It transformed into the Skybreaker Cloud Dread Bow. He raised the bow toward the fleeing thieves. A red glow gathered at its core, spreading outward until the entire weapon blazed with power. When he released the shot, a massive red beam erupted. The force of it obliterated the bandit leader and erased the others from existence. But the destruction didn't stop there. The blast swept across nearby rocks and even carved through mountains in the desert. It shot straight into the sky, leaving behind a scene unlike anything the people had ever witnessed. Inside the cyborg shell, the MC was stunned. He muttered in disbelief, unable to comprehend how powerful the attack had been. He had clearly used far more strength than intended. A moment later, the system delivered a notification. 5-star card. Star Soul General Lu Bu. 3-minute trial. Time expired. Welcome to try again next time. The cyborg form completely dissolved, returning him to his human body as he landed back on the ground. He clenched his fist and exhaled in relief. The sensation of activating a Star General had been overwhelming, like becoming invincible under the heavens. It was a feeling that truly satisfied him. Just then, the 2 children from earlier, a boy and a girl, ran toward him, calling him Big Brother. The girl leapt into his arms, hugging him tightly, while the boy approached with shining eyes. He declared that he was amazing, insisting he must be a god descended from the heavens. The boy suddenly dropped to his knees, bowing repeatedly. With deep gratitude, he thanked the MC for avenging his sister, saying such kindness could never be repaid. From that moment on, he declared that his life, Zhao Monkey's life, belonged to the MC. Around them, the rest of the survivors also bowed, expressing their thanks over and over for saving their lives. The MC quickly told the boy to stand. He explained that this was not the time for such words. The earlier attack had created a massive disturbance, and scouts from a nearby Tartar camp would likely investigate soon. He shouted for everyone to leave the area immediately.
As he glanced around, he realized that although many had run away earlier, more than 40 still remained. With only the limited food and water drawn from the system, he knew it wouldn't be enough for so many. He would have to choose carefully and save as many as he could.
Cooney raised his voice and warned the people that if they stayed together, the Tartar scouts would find them and wipe them out. To survive, he told them they must scatter and flee in all directions. Pointing toward the sun, he instructed everyone to run south as fast as they could. Little Glass tugged on his sleeve and asked where he was going. She wondered if he was returning to the world of the sky. Her words caught him by surprise. He gently told her that the world he came from, he feared he could no longer return to it. Seeing the sadness in his eyes, she reached up to wipe his tears. She told him not to cry and suggested that, since he could not go back to his world, he should come with her to Haishan village instead. When she grew a little older, she said, she would marry him and be his wife, and together they could have children. Her innocent confidence made Cooney laugh. He called her a little girl with big dreams. Inside, he thought to himself that since he had arrived in this world and since he possessed a powerful cheat, he might as well make a name for himself. If this land was filled with chaos, where human life was treated like blades of grass, then he would carve his own path through it, cutting down anything that threatened his way. He turned to the boy whose sister had died and asked if he knew the road back to Haishan village. The boy immediately knelt and bowed, saying he knew the direction. As long as they returned to Danning Prefecture first, he would be able to guide them home. Hearing this, Cooney shouted for everyone from Haishan village to gather together. People who had already started running turned back to regroup around him. Among them was Zhao Arshang, a simple, kind 16-year-old villager known for his enormous appetite. He greeted Cooney respectfully. Cooney smiled and said that Zhao Arshang truly lived up to his name, then told him to follow closely. Arshang introduced another villager, Shumyang, explaining that she had once been his neighbor before marrying into the nearby Jinshan village. Standing beside her was her young sister-in-law, Lin Xing'er. He explained with grief that Shumyang's husband and her nursing infant had been killed by the Tartars. Their entire family had been wiped out, leaving only these two women behind. He begged Immortal Master Cooney to take pity on them and allow them to come along. The MC looked at the two with sympathy and gave a silent nod. Upon receiving his approval, both young women dropped to the ground, bowing deeply. They thanked him for saving their lives and for avenging the hatred they carried. They declared that from this moment onward, they were willing to serve him as slaves if necessary. Ximyang was 16 years old and Ling Jing'er was only 13. Both had lost their parents and everyone else they loved to the barbaric Tartars. The MC noticed that Ximyang had deliberately smeared dirt across her face. He wondered whether she had done it to protect herself from being violated by the barbaric Tartars, or simply to make herself less noticeable so she could one day seize an opportunity for revenge. He told both sisters-in-law to stand, assuring them that if it was just the two of them, then taking them along was fine. The two thanked him repeatedly. He then set Little Grass down and asked if the three of them were the only survivors from Haishan village. With trembling hands, she wiped her tears and said that the others, Gowazi, Sanzu, and Chuner Jay, had all been beaten to death by the Tartars. The scar-faced boy gently tried to comfort her, telling her not to cry because the immortal elder brother had already avenged them. Once things settled, the MC instructed everyone to start moving. They walked toward the same cart he had first been trapped in. He asked the big man if he was strong enough to carry the body of Hosie's sister on his back. Zhao Arshang nodded without hesitation. The younger boy wept quietly, wiping his tears as he thanked the MC, who simply smiled in response. After preparations were complete, Cooney ordered the group to set out. They crossed the dry desert, their steps crunching over sand and stone as they moved between sunburnt dunes and barren mountain ridges. Night eventually fell, but they were still wandering through the wasteland with no shelter in sight.
When it grew too dark to continue, the MC told everyone to rest. He quietly accessed his system and produced water for them. Zhao Ershang's eyes widened at the sight of something materializing out of thin air. He shouted that the immortal had truly conjured water, proof of boundless divine power. The MC only smiled faintly. Unfortunately, he realized he still couldn't produce fire. They would have to do their best with cold water. He decided to try soaking some instant noodles instead. Using a one-star card, co-branded instant noodles, spicy beef flavor, a bowl appeared in his hands. Like a seasoned chef, he opened the packet, added the spicy seasoning, and poured in cold water to let it soak. After a while, he leaned closer and took a bite. Even soaked in cold water and despite the circumstances, extreme hunger made it taste almost like a delicacy. As he lifted a spoonful, savoring the smell, he became aware of the silence around him. All the people following him were staring at the noodles as if they were made of gold. Little Grass inched forward carefully, her eyes shining with longing. The scar-faced boy swallowed hard and asked, "Big brother, what kind of heavenly food is this? The aroma is so incredibly fragrant." The MC chuckled and told them they were just instant noodles, though they didn't taste very good when soaked in cold water. Still, he asked gently if they wanted to try some.